Hello Gothic friends, this is Alice and you are in Gothic Land, a place where we talk and learn about all things Gothic. Right, we're getting closer to Christmas, as you can see. And there's no better time than Christmas time for ghost stories, horror stories. And some people might think, no, that was Halloween. But actually, ghost storytelling at Christmas is fantastic. Remember Charles Dickens? A Christmas Carol, fantastic. But this is something we're going to talk about next video, next week, when we are closer to Christmas time. Also, I'm going to bring out some of my own ghost stories for you. That's going to be something that I'm going to give you for free. 3 of my best ghost stories that I've written, and there might be some other surprises there for you next week. But today, this week, I want to talk about, to get you into the situation a little bit, about the elements that make a good horror and ghost story. I mean, this is intuitive, right? Everybody has an intuition. We don't have to be experts to have an opinion about a good or a bad film. But it's true that there are certain elements that we can talk about and that are going to explain why we have those feelings, and also what is considered to be more or less professional. So we can talk here about the intuition, about the character's behavior, the psychological profile, the story, the setting, the pace, how it ends. So all of those elements, when we put them together, are what help us decide whether we like a story or not. And that is a lot more intensified when we're talking about horror, ghost stories, or terror. So in this video, what I'm going to do is I'm going to give you 6 elements. 6 elements. There are more. We could go into more detail. There are different approaches to this topic, but I'm going to give you my own opinion, as always, what I think is more relevant and more important for you. So there's 6 main elements that make a good horror or ghost stories. There are differences, but I'm just going to generalize. Yeah, remember that I always do this. By the way, before we get into the 6 elements, what I want to remind you is that I already have that introduction, the brief introduction to Gothic literature, that is ready. It's here. You can download it. I'm going to put the link down here at the bottom of the video. Remember, if you have no idea of what the Gothic is, but you would like to know more, or you're curious about it, or you also have some knowledge but would like to refresh, you just have to click. It's a free 45-minute presentation. Okay, so after I've said that, are you ready? We're going to talk about the 6 main elements that make a good or a bad horror and ghost story. So element number 1, the story itself. Like in any genre, the story, if it's not well put together, it has flaws, it has gaps, we don't like it. But somehow in horror and in ghost stories, this is more acute. So what happens if we have a weak story? For me, having a weak story ends up in abusing the ketchup sauce, the monsters, the gong, and all the rest. So basically, we get a weak storyline, and the weak storyline creates that we start using all the things to compensate. For some reason, I always compare these films and these stories, these books, with bad porn. Okay, it might be an awkward comparison for you, but there's a lot of one thing only, but it lacks a storyline and leaves the participation of the characters disengaged, out of place. Things don't make sense. Why are we watching? Yes, okay, but where's the story? We all like a good story, whether it's, whatever the topic is. So it's worth, if you're a writer, it's worth taking extra time planning your story to make sure that all the events happen in a coherent way. All the characters are well intertwined, the events are well intertwined, and it's all well constructed. The more you think about it, the better it's going to come out, and then we're not going to disappoint our audience. Right, so element number 2, the characters. Monsters and non-monsters. Okay, I'm not going to expand because there's a lot. Remember that I also write articles after to complement the video, so you can read the article. In the article, I will give you references, examples, and more information than in the video, right? So the characters, like in any story, they have to be believable. And again, somehow in the horror or in the ghost story, the character has to be very well form, very round. It has to be believable. And I'm talking about the human character. Yeah, the monster can get away with anything. It can get away with anything because we can get away with murder. Because it's a monster, it's a creature we've created. It doesn't have to be rational, it doesn't have to have feelings, but it has to have motivation. Every creature, every character has to have motivation. If we do things because just to do them, we're gonna have that kind of porn horror film that we don't want to. So, or book, yeah, we talk about films and stories. I always refer to films because it seems to be more obvious, is what we probably are more exposed to. But if we have human character, it has to be a well-rounded character. We have to have clear the beliefs, what the personality is like, the life problems, the psychological issues, the profile. All these are very, very important. So because what happens is, from the moment that our character is in his or her status quo and he or she is called to adventure, to face a problem, the monster, then if we have flaws, if he's weak, it's not gonna work. Okay, so we need a strong, well-rounded characters, at least the main character. The other secondary ones, we don't need so much information. That doesn't mean, however, that we have to explain everything about the character as soon as we start writing or as soon as the film opens, right? It's something that we can give the audience gradual, because that's what we like. Then we can start working towards what the character is gonna be like. We have to leave our audience guessing too. That's nice, but it has to be coherent. That's the main thing, to be coherent, and that makes sense with a normal person, people that we know. We have to choose very well the psychological profile of that character. So we have to balance, right? It's everything about balancing. This is a very difficult thing to explain in a video. It's easier when we have, when I can correct, for example, a text and I can say, well, there's too much of this, there's not enough of that, let's balance things out, or cut and put this later because it's going to be more effective. So we have to keep playing with the tension as well, and this is kind of magical, right? Another thing that I want to say about the characters, when we're talking about the monster character, the ghost, the witch, the inventive, whatever, please, if you're writing, don't fall in the cliche of the old hag playing the vengeful witch with no criteria. I am personally fed up of those cliches, and I still see them in modern, in current, more recent productions. I still see these cliches. We are getting a little bit more exquisite with our likes and our preferences. So we prefer, even if we have a monster, we want the why is the monster doing this, that, or the other. We want some kind of history, even to the point to justify his or her actions. That way, as audience, we feel better. As readers, we feel better, because somehow, if we empathize with the monster, we're as bad as he or she, and we don't want that. So we have to work on the psychological side of things here and make sure if we are going to give this extra information, is because we want our audience to be scared of this monster, but also to empathize and to see where it comes from. One thing will not remove the other, right? In fact, it will make even more scary if we do it properly, because this monster was human once, so we identify. Remember, identification is super important. And when it turns into a monster, it's something we do not know. We have the uncanny element there. We cease to know something, someone we used to know, and it has changed. And also gives us an origin of where monsters can come from. They just don't pop up like for no reason. Okay, element number 3, location and setting. They're not exactly the same thing. They're very similar. We cannot confuse them. Location is the geographical place where the action or the story happens. It can be in outer space, in a specific country, in a specific time, a year, in an invented world. It doesn't matter. It's a geographical place. But the setting is a little bit more specific. We have the haunted house, we have a cemetery, or a pizzeria with animatronics in it. Okay, can you imagine our young horror readers, how disappointed would be we get this wrong? And we do not want that, I'm telling you. One of the important aspects here is also that the location and the setting, to be effective, they need to contrast with our reality. So we need to have reality, I think, in my opinion, unless it's set up on outer space, which it will have its own space, and but still we can have what is routine versus the other world. We can have the comfort zone versus the non so comfort zone, the haunted house, for example. We have this routine, as I said, versus the other world, the monster we feed at night, etc, etc. Okay, so element number 4, fear. We cannot live fear. Fear is the thing that makes horror what it is, and ghost stories what it is. So I mean, how do we handle fear in these stories is one of the key factors. And then maybe as an audience, you might like or dislike one way or another. Let's elaborate a little bit more. So here we have to mention the phrase. The phrase when we are learning to write, when we are writers, when we are teaching writing, is show more and say less. Because there's a tendency to try to super explain our audience why this, why that, why the other. Let them discover it. Tell them, but not so much. However, this could be a trap. Because if we say too much, if we show too much and we say little, it can also have a counter effect, like it happened to me the other day. I watched something, I can't even remember the name. It was so much about showing that there was hardly any conversation, there was no storyline, we didn't have any much background. There was some background, but not a clear why things were happening that way. So again, we need to find this balance. But also the audience, we need to train as audience, we need to be trained into take things another step ahead, yes? So, we need to think, why is the author, why is the director doing this in this way? I mean, at the end of the day, fear is something that we all have. So it's an aspect that we all have. We all fear since we were in the caves. So we can tap in this constantly in many stories, and we will always win, because we still fear the unknown. We still fear things that we can explain. We can fear things that we don't see but we sense. We have still too many questions about where we come from, where we're going, artificial intelligence, what the hell is happening. So the fear factor is the one thing that horror needs to handle very well. And again, here, we don't always need to be showing God's brains scattered all over the floor, chopped limbs, body parts in a jar, although pretty much this is what a doctor does, right? So if we get the reality versus the non-reality versus the scary part, which would be this nice doctor with a nice life, and even a very good-looking doctor, who's going to think that this doctor is going to be so evil that is going to do something horrific? But think about it, in the 18th century, when Mary Shelley wrote about Dr. Frankenstein, what was she doing? She was doing precisely this, a nice gentleman, a doctor, getting body parts to make a human being. Right, so that was horror. Yep, that's horrific. Element 5, the pace. What is pace? Pace is how fast or how slow a story, the events take place. Now, again, this is very personal and it will depend on people's preferences. However, taken in a normal way, taken into a logical way within the context, pace, slow pace, is effective. This is something that happens with Japanese horror. Some people like this precisely because it's slow, it gives you time to think about it. If you're a thinker, it gives you time to think about it, to get your own theory, to see how this story is evolving. For me, I can understand it, but it's not my favorite. I am someone who needs a lot of action, so I fall asleep, which doesn't mean that it's not good, and that we need to learn to appreciate why things are done this way, why films or why stories are written in a certain way. There's something cultural about the slow pace, and something cultural also in being a little bit fast, because being fast in our ghost or horror stories is also a reflect of what's happening in our society. We're living like really in a rush. So all these aspects we need to take into account, whether we're watching, reading, creating, or just being super passive. The last element, element 6, the final twist, of course, in horror, in Gothic stories, in any kind of stories, even in other stories, in other genres, but in horror, it is very crucial, the twist. Now, some people might like having a happy ending. Some people might prefer just this frightening sensation, this being scared right at the end. But again, if we want to achieve this final airiness, if we have put all our elements together well balanced, we can give this twist at the end. We can bring something unexpected in our story that creates this horror without saying, that just shows, that just has a word. Yeah, remember the importance of vocabulary, how effective a little sentence right at the end can just change things so much, and I just love that personally. If you don't, maybe you just like Killing the Monster and Bye Bye, See You Later, and a cheesy horror film, which is fine too. You know, we have to consume what we like. But if you want to go a step ahead and you want to actually be teased to the point that maybe leaves doors open for a second part or for something else, and you have a good sensation at the end, that's great. It was fine. I just want you to actually think more why you like or you write in a certain way or another way. Okay, so basically those are the 6 elements. Are you writing a story at the moment? Are you taking into account any of these elements that I'm telling you about? And if so, which elements are you taking care or not, and why? Why not? If not, what is stopping you from doing that? If you prefer reading, do you prefer watching, do you prefer writing? What are your thoughts? Let me know, because I'm super interested to see if anybody has ever considered all these elements. I'm sure you have, but maybe this is new for you, and now I'm making you think about it, which is great, because that's one of my purposes, making you think and analyze things around you, the Gothic things around you. So please let me know what you think, and also keep an eye on the channel, keep an eye on my social media. Remember that I'm going to leave you all my links here, but that you are going to have access to the article for this video today, that I'm gonna give you some information about next week, ghost stories. I'm gonna start reading you some of my own ghost stories for Christmas, and start getting in the mood, and start watching classics. Is fantastic. So I'll see you next day. Thank you very much. Don't forget to click to subscribe, to share, because there might be people out there that might want to benefit from this product like yourself. Don't keep it just for you. And I hope you've enjoyed it one more time, and thank you very much. See you next time. See you next video. Bye bye, my Gothic friends.